There you are. So, welcome to the new episode. The star of this one is going to be this right here, the Commodore 500E electronic desktop calculator. I've got a couple early Commodore adding machines over here. That'll help us tell the story of how these came about. And then behind me here, I have a Commodore PET. Now, that's not an adding machine, so why do I have it here? Well, I thought it was a pretty neat way to show the evolution of Commodore's technology in about a decade. The 500E electronic calculator, that was Commodore's very first electronic calculator. Hit the market in 67, 68. The PET was their very first computer. It was shown in 77 and hit the market late 77, became more widespread in 78. So there's about 10 years of evolution. That's what you see in the way of technology in Commodore, a really small company at the time. That's how fast technology evolved, even in a small company like Commodore. So let's talk about these adding machines, because this is what led up to that. This is Commodore's early history. Let's get into that a little bit. What we have here, fully mechanical adding machine. These were made by a company called NISA in Czechoslovakia. It was an OEM deal, so you'll see the Commodore logo on there. It's the early logo. That's their logo from like 58 or 59. Now, stepping back, Commodore was founded when? October 10, 1958 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. They were originally founded to sell typewriters. They were named Commodore Portable Typewriter Company Limited. And the typewriters they were selling, they weren't making them, they were importing them from Czechoslovakia. The name of the exporter in Czechoslovakia was Kovo, spelled K-O-V-O, in case I'm pronouncing it wrong, because I don't speak Czechoslovakian. So they were importing them from Kovo. They were console-branded typewriters. Commodore would slap their logo on them, and they were selling them in North America, Canada, and the United States. Now this was also made in Czechoslovakia by a company called NISA. And again, I'll spell it for you. N-I-S-A. I don't know if that's how you pronounced it, but close enough. These were same deal, OEM deal, came to Canada, slapped a Commodore logo on it, sold it. Fully mechanical adding machine. I don't know a whole lot about these. I don't know that they're really part of Commodore's strategic direction. It might have just been a one-time, hey, we have contacts in Czechoslovakia, let's import them and see what happens. They only sold them in Canada and maybe only in Toronto. I've only ever seen ads for them in Toronto, and it was a pretty short-lived product. So there's not a whole lot to say about these, but it is an early adding machine. It's a part of Commodore's early history. Now this next guy here, this was part of Commodore's strategic direction. 1959, I think they started selling these. It was sold for a while just as a quick adding machine. They didn't even use the word Commodore. And then this one is branded as Commodore, and they sold it as the Commodore Quick. Now these were, same deal, not made by Commodore. They were made by a company called Willy Filer Adding Machine Company in West Germany. And Willy Filer had a West German name. I just can't pronounce it, so I'm going to call them Willy Filer Adding Machine Company. It was founded by a guy named Willy Filer. This is also a fully mechanical adding machine. Commodore was importing these, slapping their name on it. You'll notice that is the second generation logo, though. So it's the same logo, just cursive, looks a little bit cleaner. So that's their first mainstream adding machine, I would say. And the Willy Filer designs were selling great. They evolved. This is a Commodore 99 electromechanical adding machine. So by now, they weren't just mechanical like the very early ones. This one had a motor in it, so it's not really high tech. It's basically a motor that moved the mechanisms inside instead of your fingers moving the mechanisms. So not a huge transformation, not a huge leap in technology, but it was there. Now, Commodore was selling so many of these things, they eventually bought the Willy Filer plant in West Germany. They were selling so many of them, they then opened a second plant to build them. The second plant was in Shannon, Ireland. They got some grants from the Irish government to build a factory there. This one here that I showed you first, that one was actually made in Ireland. This was made in West Germany. But there was a problem. So Commodore was being financed by a company called Atlantic Acceptance Corporation. It was a Canadian finance company. And they tanked. They defaulted on their entire debt of something like $110 million. At the time, it was the largest financial collapse in Canadian business history. So it almost took Commodore down with them. But Commodore was bruised, but not beaten. To survive, they had to sell their adding machine plant, the West German company, Willy Filer. They sold it to, I think, Litton Industries. So they no longer had a source for adding machines. So what did they do? What they did was yet another OEM deal. This one, 1967, OEM deal with Ricoh in Japan. Ricoh's still around today. This was the Ricoh Model 201, sold also as a Commodore 201. This is also electromechanical, just like that previous Filer model. And finally, that is the Commodore 202, the Ricoh 202. Again, 1967-ish, so that's where we were. They got out of this market in 65, 66. They got into a new market with Ricoh in 67. But what also happened in 67? Well, Jack Tramiel had contacts in Japan now. He was traveling to Japan to meet Ricoh. Casio from Japan invented this device here in 1967. This is actually a Casio 101E, but it was sold as a Commodore 500E. Same deal. You're noticing a pattern here. Commodore did an OEM deal with Casio. They slapped their badge on it. They sold them. So let's get into the details. Leonard, thank you very much for joining me here. I want to start out by mentioning, so we're going to be talking about the Commodore 500E and Commodore's entry into the electronic calculator market. And I want to mention first off, this happened in 1967 or 68. So you were how old at that time?
About 13, 14.
So not an expert on the corporate insides of Commodore at the time, but you were at least there.
Well, not in the corporate insides, but yeah, I knew Commodore existed.
This is Commodore's 1967 annual report to shareholders, and notice what's on the front cover, an electronic desktop calculator. For them to showcase this on the front cover of their annual report is a good indicator that Commodore was pretty excited about this new product line. What do you remember generally about Commodore getting into the electronic calculator business? Like, did your father talk about that? Because that was a pretty big step for the company.
It felt like it was a big step at the time. I remember him saying that this is a new thing, and they were cool.
Indeed,
it was a new thingy, and fun dealy widget, and I like contraptions.
And the contraption shown on the front cover here, that's the Commodore AL1000, not the 500E. Moving right along here, we get to Jack Tramiel's message to shareholders. In the second paragraph, Jack tells us that Commodore discontinued its main manufacturing program in Germany. This is in reference to the German Willy Filer adding machine plant I mentioned earlier, which Commodore sold in April of 1966. In the third paragraph, we see that Commodore released their Model 201 and 202 adding machines. I showed you the 201 and 202 at the beginning of this episode. They were electromechanical adding machines, so we're still not talking about electronic calculators yet. Then we see here, these machines have been developed in association with a company whose high technological skills have enabled them, with the help of our own engineers, to produce quality machines at competitive prices. The company that Jack Tramiel is talking about here is Ricoh in Japan. And here we see Commodore secured the rights to the Barrett adding machine, so they were still actively pursuing the adding machine market. I don't believe these Barrett machines ever made it to market though. Finally, in the last paragraph here, Commodore will be entering the sophisticated and rapidly expanding field of electronic calculators. Commodore says they'll be releasing 2 models of electronic calculators in January 1968. Now, they showed the AL1000 on the front cover, so we assume that's one of the 2 models. I believe the 500E was the other. In all of the documentation I could find in Commodore's annual reports and everything, they never mentioned the 500E. The only reason I know it exists is because I got one. I found newspaper advertisements for the 500E, and I found that the 500E seemed to hit the market first.
Yeah,
All
that's my
Commodore
recollection.
mentions is the AL1000, but it is your recollection the 500E came first.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it came first. I'm surprised that there would be no mention of it. I seem to remember a Commodore annual report that had a picture of both of them.
Your mention of, I think in the Facebook group at one point I posted, here's the AL1000. It was the first electronic calculator. And you corrected me and said, no, my recollection is the 500E was the first.
Right.
That was my first time hearing of the 500E.
Just like there's no mention of Ricoh being the manufacturer of their new line of electromechanical adding machines, there's also no mention of Casio being the manufacturer of the electronic calculators they'll be releasing in January 1968. Maybe the 1968 annual report will mention the 500E or that the calculators are an OEM deal with Casio. This page shows us that in the 10 years since Commodore was founded as Commodore Portable Typewriter Company, they have really transitioned into an adding machine company. The pie chart shows that by 1968, figuring machines made up 72% of Commodore's revenue. Now we get to the goods on electronic calculators, and what do we see? Still no mention of the 500E. Once again, there's the AL1000 shown on the left. Over on the right, this whole paragraph talks about how amazing the AL1000 is, then moves on to talk about the Model 401, which was an electromechanical adding machine. New Commodore products for 1968 and 1969. There's talk of upcoming electronic calculator models, the 1121, 1161, 1152P, still no mention of the 500E, and then we move on to the 403 adding machine, which was another electromechanical adding machine. So, 1968 annual report, still no mention of the 500E and still no mention of Casio. By 1969, it's probably too late to expect to see the 500E mentioned, but let's take a look. Not specifically related to the 500E, but it's historically significant to note that Commodore's revenue increased 80% from 1968 to 1969. They were still a fairly small company if you compare this to the Commodore 64 glory years, but it's obvious that the transition to electronic calculators was fueling serious growth for the company. And what was driving that revenue? Figuring machines. They now made up 81% of Commodore's revenue. Jack Tramiel's message to shareholders in 1969 reveals that Commodore is still introducing new electromechanical adding machines. But over here, this wording is important. The main thrust in our marketing program is an increasingly versatile range of desktop electronic calculators, so that's the direction they were moving in. And here it says that Commodore is coming up with LSI designs for electronic calculators. As opposed to the early electronic calculators like the 500E, they relied on discrete logic. And they showed their latest model at the NOMDA convention in Houston. It wasn't mentioned in the 67 or 68 annual reports, but Commodore had previously shown the 500E at a NOMDA convention. The 500E specifically, I recall you had some direct first-person involvement. I mean, you were a teenager, but you actually had direct involvement in the 500E. What was that?
So I'm trying to remember exactly why, but my father took me to a North American Office Machine Dealer Association, NOMDA, meeting in Chicago in the late 60s. I don't remember exactly when it was. It was shortly after the 500E came out. Maybe the AL1000 was out at that show as well. And I remember the difficulty that the dealers that were at the Commodore booth doing the demos had with demoing this machine. It worked slightly differently than the mechanical calculators. It didn't have exactly the same usage, and this threw them for a loop. But I had no trouble with it. So I wound up doing the demos on the show floor, which caused some of the people there to make comments like, 14 going on 35.
We don't have documentation to validate that the 500E was Commodore's first electronic calculator, but we do have Leonard Tramiel's recollection, and he lived it. He was at trade shows demonstrating it, so his recollection is credible. So how do we know Casio made the 500E and AL1000? This document from 1977 will help. I got this from Commodore's treasurer, Don Greenbaum, so I assume this was given to banks Commodore was trying to borrow from. It's a booklet that describes who Commodore was as a company. On the second page, it goes through some of the history, and unfortunately, the very first date is incorrect. Commodore Business Machines was not formed in 1955. Jack Tramiel did found Everest Office Machine Company in 1955, but Commodore Portable Typewriter Company wasn't founded until 1958, and the name wasn't changed to Commodore Business Machines until 1962. But when we get down to 1967, there's the AL-1000 mentioned again. Commodore really loved that thing. Supplied by Casio, Commodore exclusive marketer of Casio products for several years. Also, it's easy to look at the Casio 101E and Commodore 500E side by side and see they're the same device, but with the Commodore model having minor case design differences. This 500E came with the original operator's instruction manual, which I scanned and uploaded to the Internet Archive, as I do with all Commodore documents. You'll also notice I put a lot of effort into cleaning documents up when I archive them. All the blemishes, coffee stains, staples, and discoloration have been removed, and it looks like a brand new document. What's even more cool is this came with the original bill of sale. This was purchased on February 19, 1969, 56 years and 6 months ago in Upper Saddle River, New Jersey. It's right around 400 miles from my home here in Pittsburgh. Kenneth Clark, he spent a whopping $669.50 on this 500E, which, adjusted for inflation, is over $6,000 US today. In 1969, you could buy a brand new Volkswagen for $1,800. So $669 for a calculator, that was a major purchase. This page gives you a basic overview of the 500E. It describes the various math functions it can perform. I mean, it's what you'd expect. But the best part, the readout, Nixie tube display.
Nixie tubes are cool.
I love Nixie tubes.
Yeah.
For the video, I'm going to try to get an angle of the display from the side where you can see how they aren't all in alignment. You know, you can see which numbers are in the front and back. They look way better in person than they do on video, unfortunately.
Yeah, they are really quite cool, and they're pretty rare these days. Though I understand there are a few places where they are still being manufactured.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But there's a couple of companies that are, because of all of this retro stuff, are making them.
Oh, that's cool.
There's a company that makes an OLED little tiny display that they put inside of a glass case to make it look like a Nixie tube.
Oh, that's super neat.
So it can look like a Nixie tube except for the three-dimensional part.
Yeah.
But you can also do anything else on it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't see those. I'd like to get one of those. I know I saw clocks that try to render what would look like a Nixie tube. So I knew that.
I have a Nixie tube clock. I bought it about 20 years ago, actually, as a kit.
Oh, neat.
And
back when they were still making them.
Yeah, I made two, one for me and one for my older brother. It was a gift for his birthday.
Oh, that's great.
And since I was making one, I thought I'd make two. And it uses Nixie tubes that are like this big. They're huge. And they're just cool.
The dimensions of this beast surprised me. 9.5 inches high, 15 inches wide, and 17.25 inches deep, and it weighs 22 pounds. The components, I alluded to this earlier in the video. Casio made these in 1967, and while integrated circuits existed, they weren't widely available or affordable yet, so all the logic in the 500E is implemented using component-level transistors and diodes on printed circuit boards. These pages provide information about what the various keys do. It took some getting used to for me that instead of having a plus key and a minus key along with an equals key, the large white equals sign is the plus key and the smaller red equals sign is the minus key. I'm impressed by what seems, to me anyway, to be fairly advanced functions for a 1967 calculator, like having a memory feature and the capacity to calculate to 20 digits using a 10-digit display. Now we get to some examples that walk you through how to use the calculator. You can watch along as I do a couple. As for the video, well, I thought the Nixie tubes looked better with the lights turned way down, but then that made the video a little grainy. So I recorded examples with lights on and lights off. Let me know which you prefer in the comments. The first example shows 587 plus 624 plus 98. Notice how the big white equal sign is the plus key. Pressing AC, answer clear, and KC, keyboard clear simultaneously is all clear. I accidentally typed 463 minus 125 plus 287. I'm having a tough time getting used to the keyboard, so let me try that again. Much better. Now we do some subtraction examples. This one is 1,265 minus 653 minus 254 equals 358. Oh, here we get to use a decimal point. 3.58 minus 5.74 equals negative 2.16. I'm going to pause here for a moment to provide an explanation. I subtracted 5.74 from 3.58 and the display shows 9999997.84 when it should be negative 2.16. The 500E's Nixie tube display has no way to render a minus sign to represent negative numbers, so instead it uses 10's complement arithmetic to represent negative numbers. If you subtract this giant number you see from 10 to the 10th, you'll end up with 2.16. Page 9, multiplication. Page 10, continuous multiplication. I'll skip the first example and go straight to the second example so you can see what the FA key does. This example, 356.248 times 83.536 times 79.628 equals that really gigantic number 2369692.0873537. So that answer is 14 digits and the 500E only has a 10-digit display. This is where the FA key comes in. FA means full answer. The 500E can calculate multiplication up to 20 digits. FA allows a 20-digit result to be shown 10 digits at a time. Little pause here. It shows us the first 10 digits, 2369692.087. Then watch what happens when I press the F key. We see the remaining digits, 35376. So what's next? Well, it's actually illegal in some parts of the world to record a video about an electronic contraption and not show the insides of it. So it's time to open this up and have a look around.